Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Today, we are delighted to have Edmund Bradford with us, who is the director of the Good Growth Academy, and he's going to be focusing on sustainability and more specifically, how marketers can drive sustainability. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get underway. If you do have some questions, please do type them into the chat area and we will address these at the end, and there'll be a short Q&A session with Edmund. Without further ado, I'll hand you over to Edmund and he'll get the session underway.
Okay, thank you, Red. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session about how marketers can drive sustainability. It's a very important area. Just out of interest for you, I'm also developing a simulation to teach sustainability, and I'm a teaching associate at Warwick Business School. And just FYI, this session is being recorded. So hopefully, if you are watching this on the recording, the weather is better than it is at the moment, which is very wet and windy Wednesday. So we'll dive straight in, because this is a big subject and we have very little time together. So let's crack on with it. So there's a couple of very simple objectives we've got for today. The first is to kind of just give you guys a bit more confidence in talking about sustainability in the next meeting that you have. Sustainability is definitely a rising issue of concern. It's definitely coming up in conversations already. And for you to have some understanding and education around that is pretty important. And also the second point is simply to say, well, this is not just a bit of a technical talk here. Actually, we're talking about some pretty big and important areas. And if any of the next half an hour gives you any small amount of inspiration to actually make a real difference in your company, then it's been a good session, and I will go away as a very happy person. And hopefully my general view, because I've been in marketing for over 25 years, my general view of all this is that marketing is almost like the hidden talent in this, and marketers can do a lot more than we are currently doing to actually to help move sustainability along. So we'll talk about that as part of this session today. So let's just talk a little bit about sustainability. There's just some stats here that I've pulled together for you. I mean, it is a perfect storm coming our way, and it's driven by some very powerful forces. You can see on the chart on the right-hand side there, that just shows you the amount of sustainable assets under management. You can see that growing, and it's going to continue to grow. Some analysts tend to suggest that over $30 trillion is invested now in assets, and Bloomberg estimates that by 2025, which is not very far away, it's going to hit $50 trillion, which is probably going to be something like a third of all assets under management. So the investment community is very much behind this, and that's one of the big drivers of interest at board level in this whole area. So this is something that's big, important, and it's not going away. And of course, we've got governments involved in it as well, with trillions of dollars, whether you look in the EU or you look in the recent announcements from President Joe Biden, even countries outside the West. So we look at China, for example, and there's a lot of government focus on it there. And back here in the UK, we've already acted some legislation in 2008, which gives us some legal commitments to tackling climate change. But also, of course, we're hosting COP26 in Glasgow this November. So you can expect a kind of a string of further announcements from our government in the run up to that. So, whether it's investors, whether it's the government, whether it's consumer activism, all of those things are driving more focus on this issue from CEOs. And it is affecting our customers and our markets. There's more and more research coming out all the time on this. So I've given you lots of references there at the bottom of the slide now, which you can go and hunt down. You will get copies of these slides and copies of this recording, of course. So for example, this is a nice, on the left-hand side here, that's a nice little report that came out last month from a company called Growth from Knowledge. And some of their stats are showing that already consumers are taking action. So 24% are actively cutting plastic waste. In Europe, for example, it's not just the young Greta Thunberg generation, the kind of the eco warriors here. this particular company asks a range of questions on personal values, and helping to preserve nature has come up to number 6 out of 57 personal values for the over 50s. Yeah, so the over 50s here are pretty strong as well. Energy efficiency is now the number 1 need when buying electric appliances. And if you look at something simple like electric vehicles, then their report suggests that while only 1% of the population actually owns an electric vehicle now, 52% said they will actively consider buying an electric engine. So very much, rising trend. And if you look at B2B, for those of you that work in the B2B world, we've been doing some research connected to the simulation that we're developing. There's some really interesting statements out there, for example, from the Chief Supply Chain Officer of Unilever, that says we're now going to be asking our suppliers to put their carbon footprint figures on invoices in the future. And of course, Unilever is one of the leading lights in this whole sustainability movement. Then some of our conversations we've had, for example, United Nations is looking at how do we measure supplier sustainability in the healthcare market. And that bottom quote at the bottom there from a buyer. Now, this buyer in the food and drink world has a spend of about £1 billion that he's looking after, and I was talking to him, and he says definitely there's been more emphasis on tracking total carbon footprint from our suppliers in the future. And I think we'll come to a point where at the moment, maybe it's a bit of a tick box exercise when you're looking at tenders, but actually, if you can't come up with viable plans for how you're going to improve your carbon footprint and execute it in terms of real measurement, then there might become a point where actually you get deselected as a supplier, particularly as a lot of companies now are being measured on their total carbon footprint, which include their supply chain. So this whole thing, whether in B2C or B2B, is pretty important for sales and marketing, and it's reshaping the whole market landscape. Whether it's changing demand in electric vehicles, that 13 there represents 13-fold increase in the number of electric vehicles on the world's roads by the end of the decade. And down here, this report by Deloitte, which came out in 2020, they looked at a range of different questions, but between 28 and 45% of consumers are already taking action. And that includes, by the way, stopping the purchase of brands which have where the consumer has ethical or sustainability concerns. So we've got changing demand levels, we've got changing segments. IBM, by the way, came out with a report last year called Meet the 2020 Consumers Driving Change, and they looked at they identified a new purpose-driven segment, which they estimate is 40% of the market being purpose-driven, and that means where the consumer is looking for or buys brands where there is alignment between the values of that brand and their own personal values. So there's some very interesting changes out there happening on the consumer level with that. And of course, we see changing solutions everywhere. We see new technology coming along. We see new products, services, innovation happening, whether it's in different countries, different sectors. The digital space has a very big part to play in the whole of this. We can see that, for example, with all the digital innovations around working from home and how that has been helping carbon footprints. And we see new competitors coming. Like you check out, there's a couple there put on there. Bite toothpaste, Life Water is another one, which are doing really good contributions to sustainability and shaking up the market a little bit in those areas. So from a marketer's perspective, these changes, this whole thing of sustainability is permeating across customers in many, many different ways, and across how we define segments, how they grow, et cetera, et cetera. So a massive area. But there's a issue here, and a major issue is do we really understand it? Sustainability is a huge area. And there are a lot of different terms thrown around, from CSR to ESG to things like the triple bottom line, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the problems that we have, as ever, when we get into big subjects like this, is just understanding the scope of it and understanding where people are coming from and perhaps where they're going to. So one thing that we've been doing over the last couple of years is pulling a lot of these terms together and putting it into a framework which we think will help marketers and other people to understand this whole area. And we call that the 6P good growth model, which you can see there on the screen. And 6P because it has prosperity, people, planet, principles, profits, and purpose built into it. And because of that, you can also see that we can link that particular model to what people are talking about. So for example, CSR tends to talk about planet, prosperity, community prosperity, and people. Social purpose tends to talk about prosperity and people. If you're talking about some of the older things like the triple bottom line, then they tend to be talking about planet, profits, and people. And what you see a lot about today is the ESG. ESG is really a way of measuring progress, measuring performance in this whole area across the 6Ps. ESG tends to talk about these 4 pillars of prosperity, people, planet, and principles. And the principles meaning governance principles, how the corporation is governed. But they tend to bury, interesting, profits and purpose within those 4 pillars. So we've pulled out profits and purpose as core issues for greater focus. And of course, right at the middle of it, and one reason we put purpose right at the middle of this is that really to make a proper progress on this, you need to have a purpose-driven organization which is really committed to this from the top. And companies like Unilever, other companies like Pepsi, are kind of really good benchmarks to be looking at for purpose-driven leaders that are really trying to make a big difference across their company in all these different areas. So we see, for example, inequality, diversity, ethics, that tends to fit into the people area. Circular economy tends to fit into the planetary area. The investors, obviously very interested in risk and the whole principles of how we think about investment risk. And sustainability tends to fit in the kind of planet area. So if you're having a conversation around sustainability, the first thing you need to think about is, are we just talking about planet? Are we just talking about decarbonization, better use of land, reforestation, better use of water resources? Or are we talking about sustainability in a much broader sense around good growth, and including things like having an ethical company that also has a lot of social purpose, et cetera, et cetera. So that model there hopefully is useful for you. You can throw that up in a conversation and just get people to kind of point to what they're interested in the whole sustainability discusussion. And you can do more than that, of course. You can actually connect that model to the marketing mix. Now, I've put in here the full marketing mix, which you'll see in service organizations, and I've added one extra thing in there. So whatever we're doing as marketers, if you're trying to be a force for good as a company, if you're trying to be a purpose-driven company, it affects all these items in the marketing mix. Now, it's a short session today, so I haven't got time to go through these individually, but I've underlined a couple worth highlighting. Good places, place in the marketing mix, that is, it tends to get overlooked, I think, sometimes by marketers, but here we are talking very much about finding the best segments, the best good growth sensitive or purpose-driven sensitive segments, that 40% that was talked about earlier, finding those consumers, or if you're in the B2B space, finding those accounts which are themselves heading in a good direction, the good accounts, if I can call them then, prioritizing those in your account prioritization process, and helping to steer your ship, your company, much more towards those good pools, those good segments where you have good supply chains in place, and you have, from a consumer point of view, they're less price sensitive because you found consumers where purpose is very important, and they will pay a little bit extra for purpose-driven brands. So marketers have a very important part to play in developing a kind of good growth strategy and to help pull their company in the right direction. And this is really important because when you talk to people in the sustainability industry, one of the things they talk about is having the right demand signals through the supply chain. So marketers have a great part to play in creating those demand signals, which then go right through the supply chain and help to develop the right sort of products, right sort of services for the right audiences in a very sustainable way. The other thing I'm going to pull out here, by the way, is just partnerships, because there's general agreement across the industry that the only way this is going to work is for organizations to work together, for a whole industry to collaborate, for example, and of course for industries to work with governments. So this is such a big area with such strong interconnectedness that working together in partnerships is definitely a key to success. And of course, in the marketing arena, we are, I would say, pretty used to working in collaborative sense and trying to drive up partnership relationships with distributors, for example, as well as helping other people in the business to develop collaborative partnership relationships. So we've got a good part to play there, I think, in helping to develop the right sort of partnership relationships with other stakeholders in other organizations. Now, the thing is, who's internally is driving the change? Now, interestingly, of course, we have the CEOs driving this change because they see this being very much a route to success, at least with the investor community, if not else. CFOs are in there because they're talking to investors. So interestingly, in this case, in many situations, the CFO is actually a converted person to sustainability. And that's not because they're an eco-warrior, it's because they're seeing that if they're on the wrong edge of the sword, there's a danger that their share price and the value of their company could decline because they're not being seen as a sustainable company. I was talking to a chief sustainability officer in a global company last month, and she was telling me, for example, that there is now more investment going into companies that are sustainable than is going into companies that are not seen as sustainable. So we truly have reached a tipping point now where if you're not seen as a sustainable company, then you're on the wrong edge of the investor sword. So CFOs are very engaged in this. Procurement are involved with it. In the UK, we have the Chartered Institute of Purchasing and Supply. They're out there educating their members how to encourage their suppliers to become sustainable. And we have supply chain executives involved with this. It's very much key to a lot of their missions. And you just look at the various statements from companies like Unilever and their chief supply chain officer on the kind of things that they're doing to help drive change in their supply chain. Chief sustainability officers, of course, are involved. But marketing tends to be a little bit at the edge of the conversations. We've certainly had conversations with sustainability experts that have no conversations with marketing at all. So marketing tends to be at the edge of this, and I think there's a real opportunity for marketing to get much more central into this discussion. Now, this is something supported by, for example, by this lady here called Pooja Khosla. Now, she said that many businesses in this space are struggling to define the real and measurable impact of their offerings on the environment and society. But marketers can help achieve this and empower sustainability. Now, she works for a company called Intelligent, which works with investors to help them understand how to invest successfully in sustainable companies. So she understands that marketers have got a very strong part to play in driving their companies in the right direction and helping to measure progress. And how can they do that? Well, they can contribute by taking 7 steps. First of all, they can help to define and find those good growth sensitive or purpose-driven sensitive customer segments. That may mean we need to look at the market in a new way, look at segmenting the market differently to the way we've done before. They can understand the needs of customers, especially linked to sustainability in those segments, and how those needs are affecting things like the value propositions for these customers. So the whole value proposition, both at a sort of a brand level, and also at a company level, could change, okay, with for 4 different segments. And if we move our ship much towards the better segments. And of course, marketers have got a big role to play in developing new sustainable solutions as well. There's always has been, but it's never often executed well, but there always has been a tight connection between marketing and product development. And often many new products fail, and the metrics on new product failure is pretty atrocious, really. But often that is because there has been enough marketing input at the front end of product development. So marketers have got a very good part to play in making sure that the product development function is developing the right sort of products and services for the right segments for the future. Yeah, we can leave the dirty, worst segments to the competition and make sure that we're focusing on the best segments for our company. And because of that, number 5, we can help the firm change course, yeah, and be targeted much more on these good growth segments, which raises the point then that we actually need to think about, writing a different sort of marketing plan called a good growth, or a good growth type of marketing plan. And in that marketing plan, from front to back, whether it's from the mission statement all the way through to the sales and marketing objectives, the segmentation, the competition, the product development, all the way through to the digital marketing plan, assumptions and execution right at the end. All of that thinking needs to have better sustainability thinking built into it. It needs to be kind of like programmed in to what we do with marketing. And we're, by the way, we're actually, because my colleague, Professor Malcolm MacDonald, has written a book on how to write a marketing plan. We're also looking at that now and thinking about modifying the marketing plan template to make sure that it is consistent with this type of thinking. So we're actually working on that at the moment. And finally, of course, marketers have a big role to play in execution of this as well. Not only do they need to be committed to good execution, but also they have a big role to play in terms of setting up the right measurement systems for this, and also, of course, importantly, integrating all the digital activity with what we're trying to do as an overall good growth strategy, which is kind of where we're heading to. So integrating that good growth strategy to become a good growth company, and integrating good growth strategy with the digital marketing tactics and actions is very important. Yeah? So the more we understand the needs of our segments, the more we are clear about which segments we're targeting, the better able we are to integrate all that with our digital activity. Now, some of this is not absolutely news. This is an evolving picture, if you like. So Stephen Mangum, who's been a leader at big branding firms like Ogilvy, for example, he said that the purpose of marketing has always been to produce growth. The role of chief marketing officers today is to produce good growth, where sustainability is a measurable, customer-driven, strategic imperative. So we're kind of just making sure that marketers get back into the middle of this and start working on it. Now, if you are kind of a Unilever, Pepsi type company, then you're probably already in the middle. But for most companies, I think marketing needs to get a bit more center stage with this. So how can they do that? Well, I think marketers they need to develop some new competencies. They need to recognize that sustainability is not going away. It is going to be ever more important. Hopefully today is a step towards you increasing your understanding of the subject. So check out all the links in the presentation because they will take you to some very interesting reports. Also look at the UN, if you haven't done already, the UN SDGs, the UN Sustainable Development Goals here, because that is recognized worldwide as a very good industry standard for goals. Okay, so take a look at that. There's a good report here, and also worth looking at this book. There are plenty of books out there. My favorite of all the books I've read over the last few years on this subject is this one here, which came out last year, Reimagining Capitalism, How Business Can Save the World by Rebecca Henderson. Full of really good case studies in there about how companies have not just done a trade-off between sustainability and profits, but have actually recognized that there is a sweet spot where if you move your ship in the right direction, you can actually make more profits than you would have otherwise have done if you took no action. Okay, so some very, very interesting cases there that actually shows you that doing this stuff actually is good for profits, yeah, as well as good for the planet. Okay, in terms of good growth, look at things like a B Corporation if you've not heard of that. That's a very, very good movement. A lot of companies are signed up to be a B Corporation, so check out what that is all about. And you can also visit our website, goodgrowthacademy.com. We've got a free newsletter in there, for example, which will keep you up to date if you want to sign up for a free newsletter on that. Okay. And the other thing I'd say, because as ever, at the end of the day, what is this all about? It's very much all about change. Big change, massive change, not only within your company, but within your industry and across the world. So, like it or not, it's good for all marketers to understand, change management and change leadership, and for however much it costs these days, 10 or 20 pounds, whatever it is, worth getting that book by John P. Cotter called Leading Change, because if we can turn marketers more into change leaders, change agents, then all this thinking is more likely to actually take effect and be executed. So try and develop those competences, I think, to help you, help others to understand this issue and drive change in the organization. So just to summarize it, I think really, this little half an hour we've had so far, really what you need to do, if you haven't done it already, is get educated about sustainability. Know enough to be dangerous, know enough to understand where people might be talking about the same issue called sustainability, but actually have two very different understandings of what it's all about. Try and move your company, even if it takes years, try and move your company through those 7 steps to good growth. Okay, because as marketers, we've got a good part to play in all of those steps. And at the end of the day, this is a really great thing to do. You're at the end of the day, you're not just helping to shift products, for more sales and more profit. You're helping your company actually become a force for good in the world by moving the front end of it in the right direction and helping the whole organization to move in the right way. Yeah, and by doing that, you're just doing your small part of this massive issue that we all have of helping to save the world. So hopefully you can be your own little superhero, and you'll then have something really good to shout about in your communications to your consumers, customers, other stakeholders, and of course you'll have a much more fulfilling life as a result of that, all that as well. So this is a big subject, and I'm conscious I only had half an hour to kind of like scratch the surface of it today. So I hope, somewhere in all those materials is something that is useful for you. But we can now take some questions, I think, if we have any questions from that. I'll maybe just ask Red to just help me with any questions that might have come up.
Thanks, Ed. That's really interesting presentation. I'm not sure if anyone has any questions. You'll have to pop them into the chat area, and we can do our best to answer them for you. I think people are just digesting that for the moment. Just to make you aware that on our blog.oxfordcollegeofmarketing.com, this is where the recording will be made available, and also the slides. I'll put a link up to those as well. But are there any questions today? Any questions maybe about what you could do in terms of your organisation with sustainability? Oh, good, we've got one here. So Mark is asking, what's the best way marketers can influence others in the boardroom, such as the CEO, CFO, who is not showing an interest in sustainability?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and this simulation that I'm creating is very much focused on those kind of like very skeptical people. Now, first of all, of course, as marketers, we have the power of the customer. So if we can give any examples or get any support from any of our customers to say, actually, this is important and this needs to be a priority for this company, then that's going to be really, really useful. And of course, the other thing that we should be doing as well, as part of change management, and I think good sales and marketing people do already, is that they kind of understand the influential relationships. So even if the CEO or whoever is pretty skeptical to all this, can we find somebody else that they listen to and get them to talk to the CEO? I think for me, at the end of the day, this isn't just about saying we've got to do this because it's a good thing to do. What CEOs respond to is profits, and there's more and more evidence now that suggests that if you do nothing, you'll end up on the wrong side of that investment community and the wrong side of customers. So doing nothing is increasingly not an option. So the question now is rather than do nothing, what should we do? And can we create a hard business case, with real numbers in there to say, okay, well, if we invest in this amount of money and our strategy migrates a bit to this type of strategy, then what kind of profitable growth should we be looking at in this scenario? So keep it very much in the CEO's language, and try and draw upon any research and any help you can, because you'll probably need it.
There's another question here. Is there a risk of marketers just ending up shoehorning sustainability into their marketing plans? Which is an excellent question, because we have some of our assessment papers are changing in December, and students will be asked to start talking about sustainability in their marketing plans. So at that point, are they going to have to shoehorn sustainability? I think that's a very good question.
Yeah, it is. That's right, exactly. And I think that interestingly, some of the research I've seen recently, I think it was from that Growth from Knowledge, for example, which is a great report to get hold of if you can get it. One of the questions they asked was about trust. Do you trust? Who do you trust? I don't have the data right in front of me, but it was something like this: that organized corporations are something like number 6 on the list of who you trust. Yeah. Not very far away from journalists. Academics are trusted a lot more. So the reason that consumers don't trust companies is because of all the greenwashing that's happened in the past. So there is a danger that we can just shoehorn stuff in. Okay, so this customer or this template is asking us to write something about sustainability. We need to put it in the marketing plan. We need to put it in the annual report. But that's the problem with that is that at some point you'll be found out, The movement now is beyond that. The movement now is not just tell us, what you're doing, give us concrete plans of what you're doing and tell us how you're going to measure the progress to those plans. I have one client in the food and drink business, a global client, and that is definitely happening with them. In the past, they've just been asked to do a tick box in terms of incorporating, telling us about what sustainability plans you have, whereas now they are being asked to quantify it, talk about it, make very clear and explicit what the measurement is, and the view is this: is that if you don't pass that, you're going to be deselected as a supplier. So this is no longer just a case of filling in boxes. This is a real case of problems if you don't do it properly.
Might help if I muted myself. There's lots of terminology on sustainability. Where's a good place to get sure we get that terminology right? I think you've provided some links in here, actually. So I don't know if there's one that you'd like to just point people to.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to a lot of terminology. These links are good. So, the United Nations, right? That's a global standard around sustainability. Okay, so look at those, all right? And they have a much broader view. It's not just about the planet, for example, in those goals. Okay, do that. And in terms of understanding the terms, I don't think, interestingly, it'd be great if there's some dictionary of sustainability terms. I'm not sure there is. The only thing I can say, if you don't mind me saying this, the only thing I'll say to you is we in the Good Growth Academy are very conscious of educating people on this area. So I would probably say best just go to our website, sign up to the newsletter, and then we'll be talking about this kind of subject continuously with different articles. We have an article already in there, for example, about a good growth marketing plan. What the importance of that. So it's probably worth just picking up on that. But the book I mentioned there is also a good one as well. So start with that, I would say, and see where it takes you.
A couple more questions to come. Training the models, read machine learning takes a lot of carbon. At the same time, companies are increasingly seeing the cost benefit of these technologies. How would you approach the sustainability of emerging tech like machine learning? Is it as simple as offsetting, or can something more strategic be implemented?
Well, it's a very specific question, and I think you need somebody that understands machine learning to answer that properly. My general view of this, and this is a sort of conversation for marketers as well, is to ensure that we are doing what we can, and the marketing community to make sure that we are targeting our ship at the right sort of segment. So, looking for customer segments which are more sensitive to energy efficiency. So, marketing it's got to be somewhere in that conversation. So it's not an easy one to answer, I know, but getting the viewpoint of the customer and making sure that this works is important. I'll give you one example, by the way. Google. Now, Google's been doing some great work on health and wellness. They've pulled together a whole set of industry experts on health and nutrition, and their view is that to be a good company is not just about being a good technology company. It's actually being a company that's good with our staff, and part of that is making sure we're serving them nutritious food. So there's a big move by Google to try and understand the connection between nutrition and happy employees. So even the technology companies can look at this in a broad session, in a broad way, to think about how can we be a bit more of a force for good out there. And I know with Google, for example, they're thinking about the lessons from that they're going to roll out across the whole world. So it'll even help the third world.
And final question for today: if a company is already working on their sustainability, how do you inspire your target audience to become more sustainable. So it's maybe the company's identified how can that trickle down to the target audience. That's actually a really interesting question, because I'm always fascinated by brands like, well, the people that buy things from ASOS being obsessed with the plastic that their clothes come in, yet not the fact that they're buying so many clothes, and actually that is often, especially with cottons, etc., much more damaging for the environment. But yeah, that's quite an interesting point, so I'll leave that with you.
Yeah, no, it's a very good one, and there's a lot. This is where, I mean, I think I said at the start of this presentation, I'm a teaching associate at Warwick Business School, and there's a lot of good research in consumer behaviour going on at the moment. I'm going to be talking to somebody next week about that very subject. So I would say to you, if you can, just hook into, and of course with Google these days, you can actually hook into scholarly articles fairly quickly. Look into consumer behaviour and how you can influence consumer behaviour. There's a lot of good thinking out there at the moment about doing that. The end of the day, there's the interesting here, as we've mentioned, is that consumers are more, where in the past it's kind of been something on their radar screen, and they've thought, you know, that I'd like to be more sustainable, but when it comes to actually buying the product, they probably aren't in many cases. Whereas now that need for purpose-driven brands is bubbling up, and it's factoring more into decision making now. So the more you can hook into those particular needs, I'm kind of like a need in terms of consumer behavior. I'm very much focused on needs. So the behaviors are linked to those needs. So if you can focus on the rising needs of consumers, you know, it might be a level down from the very top level stuff, then there's a very good opportunity then that you can influence that consumer behavior and nudge them in the right direction. So look at the academic work, it's really good out there, and focus on the real needs. And I'll give you some links to some reports today that actually gives you some interesting data on how those needs are changing.
That's brilliant, and thank you very much, Ed, today. It's a really interesting session, and thank you all of those to you that have attended today. I hope you found that useful. We obviously have recorded this. It will be available on our blog.oxfordcollegemarketing.com probably tomorrow, and also we'll upload the slides on there as well. So I will bid you all a great afternoon. A few thank yous coming in for you there, Edmund, as well, so you'll be pleased to know. But yeah, and thank you everyone so much for attending, and we'll wish you a very good afternoon.
Yeah, thanks everybody, and go out there.